Hi, everyone, and welcome to Alpine Intel's The Savvy Adjuster podcast, where we discuss the property loss topics important to adjusters with the experts who know them best. I'm your host, Whitney Bowles, a marketing specialist with Alpine Intel. Alpine Intel is an industry leader in property assessments and innovation through our operating brands, HVACI, StrikeCheck, National Fire Experts, Donan, and the Component Testing Laboratory. You can find more information about these service offerings and additional resources at alpineintel.com, linked in the show notes. We're here to share key points with insurance professionals about various property topics, including today's focus, hail damage and collateral indicators. A quick disclaimer before we get started. We're going to be talking today in general engineering and insurance terms. Obviously, each property failure comes with its own set of circumstances, which is why it's so important to get an assessment to make sure you have the facts for your claims. I'm joined today by Donan Principal Forensic Engineer Marvin Akins and HVACI Field Operations Manager Joe Brindley. Welcome to you both. Marvin, let's start with you. You've been with Donan for several years. Can you talk a little about your experience?
Sure, Whitney, and it's really good to be here today. So I've been practicing engineering for about 34 years now. I've actually been with Donan. I'm in my 16th year. Come April the 1st, I'll be a full 16 years here with Donan. So early in my career, actually before my career started, I actually used to frame houses. So that when I got my first engineering job, I walked in, and after a few 6 months or so, we'd get these phone calls, people have a crack in their slab or a crack in their brick. And so I was the guy they sent out there to look at it, figure out what was going on. So I was actually doing forensics before forensics was actually a word. Anybody even knew what forensic engineering was about. But it was really interesting. Out of all the forensics and design that I did through my career, when I came to Donan, I never really looked at roof jobs before. But so everything I know about roofs, I've learned since I've been here over the last 16 years, and it's been a fun ride and a lot of education for myself.
Well, it's great to have you. And Joe, you're HVACI's Field Operations Manager. Would you mind going into your background a bit?
No, not at all. And thanks for having me. Well, I've been here with HVACI it's been about 5 years now. And I was actually with Donan before that for another 5. So it's been about 10 years that I've been doing this. And before that, for about 20 years, I've just went coast to coast. Was a commercial contractor, large HVAC projects. From the biggest, from some mid-rise skyscrapers in Los Angeles to did some Marine barracks in Honolulu, Hawaii, and everywhere in between. So been in the air conditioning business a long time.
Wow, it's great to have you. So Marvin, what does it mean when a report mentions collateral indicators?
So Whitney, that's kind of a big topic, is that so as engineers, that we're there to assess a property, and what we're basically looking for is typically the roof covering damage from hail. But one of the first things that we've got to do is determine whether hail has actually impacted the property or not. And we do that by looking at what we term collateral indicators. Now, these collateral indicators are anything on the property that is metal or has a hard, flat surface. And what we're basically looking for is dents and what we call clean spots or spatter marks. Now, the different metal items, they can be gutters, downspouts, mailboxes, electrical boxes, equipment, metal vents on the roof, chimney caps, just anything that we can kind of think of that would be a metal that could be dented by hail. That's what we're looking at. Now, go ahead.
Does an engineer look at hail damage to HVAC equipment at all?
We do, yes. That can be one of our collateral indicators, in that what we're looking at are the fins on basically the condensing units on the exterior of the house. And so that gives us an idea of what size hailstones have impacted the property. Okay. But as far as actually looking at the units for actual hail damage themselves, that's not something that we, as an engineer or someone there to study the roof, that's not something that we do. That would be more of Joe's alley.
Yeah. So in my side of it, we actually, we look for the indicators for hail, tall panel damage, fan guard damage, in the actual coil itself. And there's several different types of coils out there. Some of them attract damage more than others.
It sounds like not every hail impact causes damage, even if it leaves a mark. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it really depends on the angle of how the hail came in. A lot of units can deflect the dents from it, but you will see some stuff. I live in the Austin area, mostly work around here. You see a lot of stuff that's it can be an inch to 2 inches in size, and it will cause some pretty good damage. So, but a lot of times you'll see, just like he was saying, like Marvin was saying, you get the the splatter marks, or polish marks or clean marks, what you call them. It's actually where it's just cleans off the oxidation that's on the equipment. It's not actually dents. It just shows you the pattern of the hail and how it came in, what direction it came from.
So you're saying that these clean spots, or what was the term you just used?
Splatter or polish marks.
So they aren't
Harmful
taking.
use.
So what they're doing is taking off sort of the gunk from your equipment being outside and showing you the metal of the actual equipment underneath.
Exactly. Actually, those clean spots usually are the texture, the color of the unit before the oxidation has started to take hold over years of this stuff sitting exposed into the elements. So it's actually showing you a clean unit, spots on it that were clean, or how it came from the factory.
So a lot of people might look at that and say, well, this is cosmetic, but you're sort of more looking for functional damage.
Yeah, actual deflecting spots that are there's actually indentions that could actually, let's say for a top panel on an air conditioner, if you get some indentions that could actually hold water, and those those little spots, and over time that can create rust, and which would be a functional problem over time.
And Marvin, do you look at cosmetic spots at all, or are you also just looking for functional damage?
Well, we have to look at both, really. I mean, through my experience over the last 30 years is that I've learned that that certain insurance policies have coverage for cosmetic dents or cosmetic issues caused by a weather event such as hail. And then typically most of them will, can cover for functional damage. So when we're out on site and we're doing our study, we have to basically look and determine, is this a cosmetic issue or is it a functional issue? And so your typical dents in your gutters, downspouts, and metal roof vents, we're not going to see that those dents actually penetrate or create a hole in that metal. So if it has not damaged the finish on the different metals, or if it has not put a hole in it, then it's just a cosmetic issue. Okay, so it's still going. You haven't hurt the functionality of the item. It's still going to function as it was intended, as it was installed, as it was designed. But when it actually has created basically a hole in those items, and maybe even a hole that enters the building envelope, then that is what we would actually term as functional damage. So yes, we need, as engineers, we need to identify, is this a cosmetic issue or is it a functional issue?
Should insurance professionals be worried at all about hail damaging any sort of protective coating or chemicals that are supposed to protect the equipment?
I would say yes, is that if the hail has removed the coating, whether it's the galvanization on a metal roof or if it's the paint on HVAC equipment, whatever it may be, if it's removed that, you basically reduce the useful life of that item or that piece of equipment, because now that coating on those different items and equipment is basically its weather protection. So once you've exposed that metal to the elements, it's going to rust quicker. It's not going to last as long, and therefore it's going to, like I said, you just basically reduce the life of that item, and that's something that we would term functional damage.
Okay. Joe, what other causes of loss may be claimed as hail damage that are not?
On your larger projects, say a strip mall or something like that, you'll see a lot of identical marks, and it's usually tool marks, tool belt marks from technicians over the years, exchanging parts, fan motors, whatnot. You see a lot of pressure washer damage from using too much water pressure, or just not doing it correctly. And yeah, and you'll see a little bit of vandalization for schools or whatever, equipment or balls being kicked up on the roof. You'll see dents from that. And to tell you the truth, on your gravel roofs, you'll see a lot of times straight winds will blow gravel up onto the coils, and you'll see damage that way, or dings that way. It can appear to be hail, it's actually not.
And how would you determine that something was one of these other perils as opposed to hail?
We'll say pressure washing. It'd be repetitive. You'd see the same kind of pattern over and over. It's easy to just catch it with the naked eye. That something just doesn't look right. It just looks too, coincidental. That's exactly the same, marks on the coils. A lot of times that's from, like I said, technicians and their tool belts. They'll wear a tool belt a certain way, or they'll have something in their pockets, or they're just their pants in general. They rub up against those taller units, and you'll see the same marks over and over on the same locations of the coils. Things like that.
Can I add to that, Whitney?
Absolutely.
So that's one thing that we, as engineers, do when we are looking at the collateral indicators. That we're basically looking for three things: is that we're looking for the size, which is the diameter. We're looking for the direction that it came from, and we're looking at somewhat the density that it hit the property. So the main two, the diameter or the size, and the direction, tell us a lot. So as our engineers are assessing the property, they're paying attention to the side of the house or the building where they find the collateral indicators, where they find these dents and clean spots and spatter marks. It may be as simple as a house that's got the backyard has got a privacy fence. So if you have some algae staining on that privacy fence, and the east-facing fence has been hit with a bunch of hail, it will clean that algae off and leave us evidence of hail impact. So that's telling us, just as Joe's example with the gravel and so forth, is that if you pay attention to the direction of your collateral indicators, where they came from, and then knowing that you've got gravel on the roof, well, do you have the same amount of dents and so forth on the unit up high as you do down low? So it's paying attention to where your damage is and the direction it came from and the surroundings about it that can tell you a lot about whether this was actually caused by hail or not.
Okay, so let's go over these 3 Ds again, Marvin, because I feel like that is a very important thing for insurance adjusters to remember. So that was number 1, the diameter.
Yes.
And number 2 was the direction.
Yes.
And number 3 was
the density of the hail.
The density of the hail.
Meaning the actual number of hailstones that fell, not the actual density of a specific hailstone. Let me elaborate on that. Is that one of the main things that we're looking for when we see the dents and the clean spots on these collateral indicators is we are trying to determine the size of the hail that hit the property. And the reason that is important is that because our typical scope is that we're there to look to see is the roof covering damaged by hail. So we've got research out the wazoo that basically tells us what size hailstones it takes to cause damage to, say, a 3-tab shingle or a dimensional, some folks call them an architectural style shingle, or even a modified bitumen low slope roof covering, a metal roof, just whatever it may be. We've got all that research. So one of the research papers that we have can basically help us estimate the size of the hailstone based on the size of the dents in the different metals. So if you've got a really thin metal maybe it's a flue gas cover, which are typically really thin aluminum that the hailstone strikes it. That dent could be as much as twice the size of the hailstone. Whereas if you've got one of these exhaust fan covers, metal ones on a roof, it's really thick metal. So the dent in it could be about half the size of the hailstone. So we're there trying to get an estimate of what size hail has hit this property so that we can relate that to what I termed as a threshold damage for the shingles. Because we know that the research shows us that it takes at least a 1-inch hailstone to damage a 3-tab shingle and 1 1/4 inch hailstone to damage a dimensional shingle. So by knowing the size of the hailstone helps us determine if what we're actually seeing on the roof is caused by hail or not. So then you throw the direction in there, is that all storms are directional. So I know in this part of the U.S. that typically our storms come from the southwest, not meaning it can't come from the northwest or the northeast, but as we're finding these collateral indicators and we see the collaterals are telling us that the hail came from the south and southwest, then once we get up on the roof, any hail damage that we may find on that roof covering should be on our south and west facing slopes, with very minimal or none on the north and east facing slopes. So this is what the collateral indicators help us determine, is that we're getting to that point where we can actually determine whether that roof covering is damaged or not.
Okay, so if you do an investigation on a roof and all of your research is telling you the direction should be coming from a specific way, but all of the damage you're seeing is on a different part of the roof, you're going to say this is not a collateral indicator of hail.
That kind of depends. Okay, so when we're given a project within the scope of work, we're given a data loss. So whatever that data loss may be, last month, so forth, and most, if not all, hailstorms are pretty well documented. So we go out there and we know that, say, this storm came from the southwest, but yet we're not finding any collateral indicators on the south and west sides of the house. But what we do find is collateral indicators consistent with hail on the north and east sides. So not meaning that it's not necessarily whatever damage we find was not caused by hail. It could be happened from another hailstorm. It might not be from the one that we're there specifically looking at. And I know that's important to adjusters because sometimes the agent may not have written the policy, but maybe 6 months ago. And then all of a sudden they're asking us, hey, I need you to determine, number one, is this hail damage? Number two, when did it occur? And so based on directionalities and so forth and what we find there, and then based on the weather research that we perform, then that can tell us a lot about which storm actually affected the property.
Would you say that the absence of collateral indicators are just as important as the collateral indicators you might find?
Oh, no doubt. So when I'm doing a hail study on a house and I find no dents, no clean spots, no evidence that hail actually impacted this property, then I know that once I get up on that roof, whatever issues or let's call it damage that I may find to the roof covering, I know it's not going to be from hail. Okay, there are all other types of issues that can affect a shingled roof. I mean, one is that heat blisters are predominant. I mean, it's actually a manufacturing defect within the shingles that can lead to these heat blisters that pop and erode the granules off the roof and so forth. And a lot of folks mistaken that for hail damage. If your roof is in a well-shaded area, you could get moss and lichen growth on the roof. And a lot of folks may think that moss and lichen growth is just growing on the surface, but it's a plant and it has roots. So those roots intertwine themselves with the granules on the shingles, and something comes along and knocks that moss and lichen off, and it takes the granules with it, which can be mistaken for hail damage. So there's many things like this that our engineers are very well versed in and can identify that can help the adjuster determine, hey, is this actually hail damage or is it not?
Joe, it might be difficult with HVAC equipment to know whether functional damage is due to a hailstorm or something else. Is there any testing that you might do to help determine that?
Sure, we do functional testing. We can take test your refrigerant levels and the way the motors work and the amp draws and the stress level the motors are under. Also, you can, your larger hail will impact the fan guards, and it can, you have your fan blades are curved in a certain pitch to spin and to pull air out of the system. That's how it works. And those hail dents can actually modify, the pitch at where the fan blades are at, bend them a little bit, and you can see and hear the dysfunction that you're having from those issues. And we have meters and things that we test with that to do that with.
Is testing always going to be necessary to determine functional damage?
We'll do comb testing. We'll actually take a 4-inch square of the coil and we'll, test it. We'll try to use our combs to see if we can actually comb out the coil to see if it's viable to do that, whether, if it's a hardy coil and it doesn't have corrosion or whatever, and you can actually comb it, or if you try to comb it and you'll actually damage the coils further, trying to perform that. So we try to determine that for the adjusters.
Well, the fact that we are now all kind of under Alpine Intel and we can work together a lot more easily than if we were apart, are there times when both HVAC and structural experts might be needed on a claim?
Sure. I've had projects before where we were called out to look at basically the roof, and or whatever it may be, and we find a lot of issues with the HVAC system. And it may not have anything to do with hail. It may be a water intrusion job, where through our deduction, we determine that there's an issue with the internal air handling unit. So at that point, we would recommend that the adjuster get them some HVAC out to take a look and see if they can determine exactly why that unit is leaking and causing damage to the residents.
And on the HVAC side, it's the same thing. We might just be there for a hail assessment, and we can find that there's, like I said, water intrusion problems or something like that. And we would recommend, that they have Donate come in to look at the structural problems that might be resulting from this water leak or whatever, something like that.
Joe, keeping our clients' privacy in mind, can you think of any specific examples where you needed to call in a structural expert?
Oh, I'm sure there's been a time or two, but it would be hard for me to pinpoint one. Usually we're there during Donan's visit or after.
And what about you, Marvin? Can you think of any time when it was really vital to get in an HVAC expert?
Oh, sure. I've had projects. I can think of one specifically where this house was constructed over a concrete slab on grade, so it's on slab. And just out of the blue, one day the floors had hardwood floors through the living room and so forth, and the floor started to buckle up. And so, of course, they filed an insurance claim. And since it was right here in my hometown in Mobile, Alabama, I went and took a look at it. Well, initially, you really couldn't identify where the leak was coming from. So something was going on under the slab, because there's no leaks in the roof. There's nothing going on with the environment that I could tell within the house itself. So I told I asked the homeowner, I said, hey man, why don't we do this? Let's shut the AC system off for 4 or 5 hours. I'm going to leave and I'm going to come back with my infrared gun, and I'm going to do some imaging and see if I can determine where this water's coming from. So I came back, and sure enough, on my infrared camera, the floor lit up in this just blue strip that led from the mechanical closet out to the condensing unit. Okay, so that told me there's a leak somewhere in the HVAC system. And so I advised the adjusters, hey man, we need to get some mechanical guys out here to take a look at this. and see what's going on. And had other instances where I was there in the house or on a different project where the interior of the house was really moldy. Okay. And walking around, looking at different things, looking at the roof, looking at the foundation, no other real evidence pointing out, say, where's this mold coming from? Until I walked by one of the floor registers for the AC system, and that air felt super duper cold coming out of that register. So I went and got my temperature gun and took a reading of it, and it's like 45-degree air that's blowing out of the register. And Joe, you correct me if I'm wrong, but that should be somewhere around 54, 55 degrees.
Sure.
And so anyway, so then I went and took a look at the unit and realized that, hey, for the size house, this unit's too big. Okay, so then it's not say, okay, we need to get some mechanical guys in here to take a look at the system, see if it's really too big, or if it's just right, or if there's something else going on. But when you have that exceptionally cold air blowing into a house, is that you're going to create some condensation, especially down here in the South when we've got really high dew point temperatures that can lead to condensation on the interior of your house that can lead to the mold. So anyway, there's a couple of instances there where I have advised the adjusters. I don't know whether they follow through with it or not. That's one of the sad things about our side of what we do here at Donan is that we'll go look at a project, we'll write a report, we'll give it to the adjuster, and we never really know what comes out the other side, whether it's covered or not. And we really don't care. We don't want to know one way or another whether it's covered or not. Because then once you start thinking about coverage, then all of a sudden your reports get to kind of be biased. And we want to provide an unbiased opinion in every report that we put out.
Well, that sounds great. Joe, can you think of any cases where collateral indicators or the lack thereof really helped you determine the direction that your site visit needed to go?
Actually, I have a little good story for that. Did a large hail study, rather large condo complex in Central Florida. Big hailstorm, and this was just a few years ago. So, get to the building. Everything's there's a condenser farm. All the AC units are on the roof. This is a high-rise building. It's about 20 stories high. And there's absolutely no coil damage, no polish marks anywhere. There's just rather large dents on the fan covers. So large that they've actually broken the fan covers, and the inside of the coils were dented heavily. But there was no other indicators whatsoever. It looked like someone had taken a rather large hammer and just smashed the very tops of each of these units. We're talking over 100 units, almost the same dents over and over. And I was convinced while I was on the roof, more or less, that this was vandalism or someone did this on purpose. Until I got back down onto the ground, and next door to this building is some single-story condos with PVC fences. And I was talking to a gentleman outside, asking him about the storm, if the storm had happened. And he said, oh yeah, these hailstones were the size of a softball. And I said, well, there's no indicators of this anywhere except for the very tops of these units. And then I started to look at his fence, and the top of his fence was destroyed. And how he explained to me, these stones were so big, they came completely straight down, which you don't see that very often. Usually the wind's blowing really hard and the hail comes from an angle. This hail came straight down. That's why it left no polish marks. In the indicators that I'm looking for on a typical basis, there's none of those, because this hail came straight down and just did tremendous damage to the tops of these equipment. It's the first time I'd really seen something just like that. So if I wouldn't have seen the fence and talked to the neighbor, I would have thought this was a fraudulent claim.
Well, and it's a good thing that you noticed all of that. Marvin, can you think of any cases where the collaterals or lack thereof were really important?
Oh yes, it's there's so many projects that can run through my head on this, but I do. And this one was kind of easy, but there was a huge hailstorm that went through Jackson, Mississippi several years ago, and we got a call for a project to go look at this house to see if the shingles on the house were damaged or not. And one of the cool things about this project is that the shingles had just been replaced. They had put the last nail in the last shingle 3 days before the hailstorm hit. So we're talking about a brand spanking new roof. So I get there and I'm looking at the collateral indicators. I don't recall whether there were any gutters or downspouts on the house, but all the metal vents and so forth on the roof were collapsed. I mean, they were just squashed. And so this is big hail, okay? And so then I start looking around, and I actually found where that there were actual punctures through the shingles, through the roof decking. And there were these semicircular shapes in the decking, and this was all from hail. So this was 4 to 5 inch diameter hail. So not that the collateral supported that, hey, this was very big hail that hit this property, and led us to know that, hey, this damage that we see is actually caused by hail. Then there's been other instances where I've been there and I find no evidence of hail impact on any of the gutters, downspouts, or other collateral indicators around the property, but yet I get on the roof and all of a sudden there's these nice round indentations. And it's funny how they show up in little groups. Okay, there may be a group of 4 or 5 here, and especially if it's a steeper slope roof, is that on steeper slope roofs, the easiest place to walk a roof is up the hips, up the valleys, and along the ridges. So I start finding these groups along these hips and ridges, and as I mentioned earlier, hail's directional. It's should only affect 1 to 2 sides of the roof. And here I find these funny looking groups, and it faces all 4 directions. Okay. And while the marks on the shingles were very similar to hail damage, all the evidence didn't line up. So it was my determination that this was caused by man-made. Don't know what he used to do the damage, but it just did not line up with hail. So the collateral indicators in that project were very, very important, in that whoever did this overlooked the aspect and didn't know what we actually do for actually determining if a roof covering is hail damaged or not, and they left out the collateral indicators. So, and I know people have gotten smarter over the years, and we've actually found where individuals have intentionally damaged the collateral indicators just to try to lead us in the direction that, hey, what you see on the roof's got to be hail damage because you've got collateral indicators to support it. Well, that's not always the case.
And Marvin, what would you say are the most important things that adjusters need to take away about hail damage and collateral indicators?
So I teach as we hire new engineers, their very first week, I teach a class with them or to them about hail and wind damage to asphalt shingles. Okay. And one of the big things that I point out during my talk with them is talking about collaterals. And I go through a whole process of how to do a site study and so forth. And I tell them that with any weather-related report or project is that when you walk onto a property, your brain needs to be thinking collaterals, 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 collaterals. That needs to be the very first thing you look for. Okay. Because if your collateral indicators are basically void of any clean spots, dents, or anything like that, then any damage that you find on the roof is not going to be caused by hail. It's going to be caused from something else. Whereas when you do find these dents and clean spots, that typically what we find is going to be cosmetic. I said it's not typically functional. I mean, it can get where it punches a hole through it, or it erodes the finish off of it, so therefore it could be functional.
But Joe, I'm gonna throw that question back to you as well. From the HVAC side, what do our listeners need to take away about hail damage and collaterals?
It's important, but not always. Sometimes like I said, sometimes you'll find hail that comes straight down that'll do some strange damage to equipment, and you'll think to yourself, that's not hail. But you just have to do the research, to find out what actually happened. And sometimes that's entertaining to yourself to try to do that.
Well, thanks again to both of you for being here and sharing your insights about hail and what damage to collaterals can mean for claims about roofs, building envelopes, and HVAC equipment. And thanks to all our listeners. Look for our next mini episode where we'll explore how other weather events may impact collaterals. Subscribe to this podcast to make sure you never miss an episode. And if you have any property claims that need assessments, head on over to alpineintel.com to submit an assignment or get more details about how our suite of services can bring you the answers you need to feel confident about your settlement decisions. You'll also find additional information and resources in our show notes. We'll see you next time.